Richie here from Cerify Meldrum with a quick video on one of the topics that is in both FRM and CFA. So we're going to hit it from a CFA point of view to set you up to look at it from an FRM point of view. And the topic is VAR. It's just your obviously fairly standard measure of risk. In the world of CFA, you'll see a little tiny teaser at level 1. It'll really just be introduced into your consciousness. At level 2, okay, we will see how to calculate it parametrically, just assuming a normal distribution. But then we'll pretty much leave it there. We'll point out its limitations and the fact that it doesn't give us an exact number. It just tells us a minimum loss, a given percentage of the time, and then we'll move on. But in the world of FRM, you will take a sledgehammer to it, break it open, and go into a lot more detail. So I'll set up the CFA side of things so you can go away and then think, okay, well, what do we then do in FRM? And if you are a CFA candidate, just to whet your appetite, once you've got the CFA out of the way, what you're then going to see when you launch into FRM with Bionic Turtle. So enough blathering from me. Let's take a look. I've got here a set of daily returns from my portfolio, from which I've calculated a daily standard deviation and daily mean. Here they are. Now, I'm going to calculate, as I say, a VAR. To calculate a VAR, I will need a time period. Given I've got a daily standard deviation and daily mean, I think it makes sense to do a daily VAR. I will need a probability, so I'm going to do 5%. And I will need a method of calculation. So we've said we're going to do it on a parametric basis. And to keep it really simple, I'm going to assume we have a normal distribution of returns. So what is my calculation going to look like? Given my standard deviation and daily mean, I need a probability of 5. So let's fill that in and roll with 5, which means given I've assumed a normal distribution, this is what I'm looking at. Assume this is normal. I know it's a bit freehand, a bit lumpy there. But now what I'm saying is, look, tell me, VAR wants to tell me if I can cut off the distribution here, what loss sits here? What loss cuts out, isolates 5% in that lower tail? If I can find this amount here, I can say to a client, in this case, I can say to my portfolio, all right, this is the loss that will be exceeded 5% of the time. Now, given I've assumed a normal distribution, it's pretty easy to get this cutoff point because I know the Z value. To catch 5% in that tail, this Z value must be minus 1.6449 or 1.645, as you know and love. So this is nothing more than looking at confidence intervals, really, from way back in CFA level 1. We're just saying that point there, beyond which I have 5% of the distribution, 5% of my returns, is going to be 1.6449 or 1.65 standard deviations below the mean. Now, just to be consistent from a CFA point of view on how they calculate it in the learning module, I'm going to refer to the Z as a positive number. We can see clearly we are to the left of the mean. This would be the mean. That's a Z value of 0. We know that's a mean return of 0.0949%. So we are to the left, but they put it in as a positive value and say, right, let's calculate this distance, the distance from the mean to this cutoff point, as plus 1.6449 times the daily standard deviation of 1.3432%. That comes to 2.21. In other words, this point here, which isolates the lower 5% of my returns, is 2.21% below my mean return. That is my mean return. So that allows me to calculate VAR. I know what my mean return is on a daily basis. It's 0.0949%. And I know this point here is, I've just calculated, 2.21% below that mean, which gives me a VAR of minus 2.1144%. That is this point here, the cutoff. So I can say if that point there is minus 2.114%, let's fill it in, minus 2.1144% is here. I can say that 5% of the time, my portfolio will experience losses greater than 2.1144%. Now, if I add in a portfolio value, let's say 100 million, this is no longer my portfolio, 100 million, well, VaR is a loss of 2.1144%. Simply multiply it by your portfolio value, and we have our 5% daily VaR on a parametric basis. We can tell clients, you can tell me, that this portfolio will have losses exceeding 2.114394 5% of the time. Now that's daily. You might be saying, well, it's all well and good, Richie, but surely we should know how to calculate annual VaR. And yes, you should, absolutely. And be careful. You are not simply going to take your daily VaR and annualize it. That is not going to fly. Why? Because yes, your mean, you can annualize simply. And when I say simply, I mean multiply it by the number of trading days in a year. Unless you're told otherwise, assume that is going to be 250. So take your daily mean, multiply by 250. You can get your annual mean return. But it's the standard deviation you've got to be careful with. Standard deviation does not scale with time. It scales with the square root of time. So to annualize a daily standard deviation, you would multiply by the square root of 250, or 250 to the power a half, which in this case gives you 212371. That's the most common mistake that people make, multiplying this standard deviation by 250. You can scale variance with time, but remember the standard deviation is the square root of variance, so you have to square root the 250. Now, once you have your annual standard deviation and your annual daily mean, the rest of the steps are exactly as before. But look at your answer. You are not taking daily and scaling that by 250. You are adjusting your standard deviation and your mean and then following the same process. So look out for that. Now, that's about as far as you would go in the world of CFA level 2. We'd calculate that parametric mean. And then we would say, look, it's all well and good telling your client this is your daily or your annual 5% VaR. But all you're telling him is you will experience losses greater than that 5% of the time. The question that's going to come back from investors who have never met VaR before is, okay, well, that's all well and good, but what will that loss be? And VaR doesn't tell us that. What you'd need to quote is conditional VaR. And that relies on conditional probabilities, which we saw again back in level 1. If you studied CFA, you'd say, okay, given, there's your hint, it's conditional, given that we are in this tail, given we've exceeded, so I know I'm experiencing a loss in here, given I'm in that tail, what is the expected value of that loss? Give me a number. That is conditional VaR, or expected shortfall. And that is the difference between CFA and FRM. CFA wants you to be aware of this risk measure. FRM, as I say, wants you to then crack that apart and say, okay, now let's delve into it and have a look at expected shortfall and go into a bit more detail. That's where Clay would take over and say, okay, let's go on and calculate ES.